So welcome. This is a really special month of Voyage Fromage. My name is Julia. I'm the owner of Formaggio Kitchen. I'm here with David Robinson, who is one of our lead importers of cheese at Formaggio Kitchen. And we are going to be deep diving into the world of Comté tonight. And Comté is a cheese that is exceptionally important to Formaggio Kitchen and the history of Formaggio Kitchen. And you'll notice typically Voyage Fromage, we send out 4 cheeses. You'll notice this week you received extra cheese, and that was intentional. We felt that would not, folks wouldn't be too upset about that. And so we wanted to do something that I think not a lot of people have the opportunity to do, which is a vertical tasting of Comté, looking at the differences based on age. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to really deep dive tonight as we get later into the presentation, and we're going to show you the flavor wheel of different terminology and flavors that you should be finding in various ages of Comté to help you to taste and identify those different flavors that we're tasting as we taste through the young all the way up to the old. And so really the focus tonight is Comté. When I first started at Formaggio Kitchen about 16 years ago, this is really one of the first cheeses I learned about, because this became the most important cheese to Formaggio Kitchen. The previous owner became enamored with Comté when he visited Paris. He visited a little cheese shop in Paris, which unfortunately the owner has since retired, but I had the joy of visiting. And he tasted Comté there with a friend of his from Neal's Yard Dairy, and really said, "This is the best Comté I've ever had. How do I bring this into the United States?" And so they were able to travel through an introduction from that cheese shop owner to Marcel Petite. And Marcel Petite is in the Jura, and all of the Comté that we're featuring tonight is from Marcel Petite. And so you can see with our slideshow up here, it's really right on the Swiss border, and you're headed into the French Alps, and that's a view actually right outside as the cows as you're driving up to one of their aging facilities. And it became sort of a passion for the previous owner to bring this cheese in. But at the time, it was sort of felt that Americans did not have the palate for such a high quality, beautiful cheese. And so it became a test where Isan, the owner, had to taste with the chef de cave, the gentleman who cared for all the cheeses and dictated kind of their maturation levels. And he would taste a wheel with him and say, "What do you taste?" And whatever was answered was then analyzed by the chef de cave to determine, A, does this person know what he's speaking about? And then B, digging a little deeper. If Isan said, "I taste hazelnuts," then the next question was, well, are they skin on hazelnuts? Are the hazelnuts toasted or raw? And so there was no indication if the answer was right or wrong from the stories that Isan told me. It was really just a nod, and then they would move on to another wheel. Well, clearly he did something right, because we were then allocated wheels of the Marcel Petite Comté, which for us in the beginning was a very small allocation. And then over the years grew and grew to the point where when I first started, we only received about 1 wheel of the Comté Grand Cru, which you all received tonight, per year for the entire company. And now we're able to get much, much more, to the point where at any given time, sometimes we have up to 8 different ages of Comté. And so what we're going to be diving into tonight is really looking at the differences of the aging, talking a little bit about what makes Marcel Petite so special and why we use Marcel Petite as our source for Comté, and then just really have a lot of fun with you. And as always, with all of our Voyage Fromage courses, we really want to encourage you to ask questions. But in this case in particular, share your thoughts on what you're tasting as we go through. So before we get started with sort of what Comté is, does anybody have any questions, or are we ready to get moving?
Did everybody get an email with a PDF of the flavor wheel, out of curiosity? If you did, if you're able to pull it up, please do, just so you have access to it at some point. It's a really, really wonderful tool for describing flavors in Comté and other cheese. And also, honestly, it helps you with describing flavors in general. You can use this with wine in an odd way as well. So I just want to make sure everybody has that.
And as we go through and back and forth, we will put this up while we're tasting so that you can reference it as well. So what is Comté? Comté is actually, was originally called French Gruyere, and it's made in a very similar style as Gruyere. The wheels are gigantic, from my opinion at least. They're about 80-pound wheels. And you can see in this image what the wheel looks like. This is considered a cooked pressed. This is a great shot of the size of the wheels, with a human for scale. They're quite large. And so this is a cow's milk cheese originating in France, and it is a cooked pressed cheese. And that's a really important distinction because a lot of times people hear cooked pressed and they think that it's pasteurized. This is a raw milk cheese. All the Comtés that we're tasting tonight are raw. But as we've learned in previous classes, once you separate the curd and the whey, you have all of the curd. In the case of Comté, they actually will gently cook the curd. And what that does is it does multiple things to the cheese. First, it helps to expel more moisture. In general, Comté has a much lower level of salt added to it than a lot of other cheeses. And part of that is due to the locale, lugging salt up a mountain. When you're thinking about, the olden days of making cheese was a bit of a logistical nightmare. And so you need to think of other ways to expel moisture. And so heat is one way to expel moisture. So adding the heat to the curd helps to expel more moisture. And then David actually has watched Comté being made and can talk a little bit about the importance that it does to the actual structure of the curd.
So Comté is it's a raw milk cheese, right? Which means that it's unpasteurized. However, cooking doesn't pasteurize at the temperature it gets cooked to. So Comté is cooked to the temperature of about 141 degrees, sometimes a little bit less, but never more than that, for approximately 20 to 25 minutes. And as it cooks, and this is a very gentle cooking, it's being mixed the entire time. Oddly enough, for something as traditional as this is all done in a mechanized vat at this point. Strictly copper, as it's always been made, but everybody uses machines now to monitor and help stir, mostly done for consistency purposes. In any case, heating the curd to 141 degrees for this amount of time does a couple things. So it's going to change the flavor, right? If you ever think of having frothed milk. The flavor of frothed milk is so different than the flavor of just straight milk. If you have a coffee, an espresso with non-frothed milk, one frothed milk, the flavor, not just the texture, is really different. So you're changing the flavor, but really it's done for a couple reasons. It helps with the pliability of the cheese. So back in the day, all these cheeses were made in slightly higher elevation. And while the Jura Mountains they're not the Swiss Alps. We're not talking 2,000 meters, whatever, but they're still high up and they still have to go down the valley. And the cheesemaker would make their cheese and hold it for 2 to 3 weeks before it went down into the valley. And so by cooking the curds, one of the advantages is that the wheels, these 80-pound wheels, and honestly, think of the size of a what's it called? Not a spare tire. Think of a spare tire. It's about that size. And so a wheel that big, if it's not pliable and it's on a cart or it's being transported high elevation to low, it could easily crack. So these wheels, so the cooking helps with the pliability. Where literally, if you see a wheel of Comté at about 2 to 3 weeks, you can pick it up and it'll curve. Literally, I mean, it's a very strange thing to see. The first time I saw it, I cringed. I thought the thing was going to break, and it helps them. So you're able to have that aspect of it. The other part of this is that it does 2 more things. One is it does help it make a little more melty in the end. The texture of those curds and the final product changes. But it also helps in the aging process. And that, because of the cooking, if you look at your piece of cheese that you have in front of you, you can go from top to bottom, and with the exception of the cheese that's right at the rind, it's essentially exactly the same color all the way through. So the cheese ages the same from top to bottom and from inside to out. So you're not getting significantly different cheese from the center of the wheel to the very edge. And when you talk about a wheel that's as big as it is, consistency is wonderful. And so cooking the curd really helps with that aspect, which is why we feel confident that any piece of cheese that we're cutting that you're getting, everybody's getting the same quality. Everybody's getting the same flavor profile. It doesn't taste weirder because it's near the end or the middle. Everybody's the same. And that's kind of a wonderful advantage to cooking.
Yeah. And so then the next question becomes, why Marcel Petite? Because there are many, many affineurs of Comté. And I use the word affineur, which I know that many of you are familiar with, which is someone who ages cheese. Because Marcel Petite is an affineur. And what's unique about Comté, and Morgan, if you're able to back up to that map of the fruitiers, what's unique about Comté is it really, in a way, it takes a village. So this is a really lovely map that actually exists at Marcel Petite, which shows the different fruitiers along in the region. And so each fruitier is essentially a co-op of the various farmers in the area. And they're all, on the general grand scheme of things, relatively small. And so they're all making their cheeses and then sending them to Marcel Petite to be aged. And so that's a really important distinction. And the reason that Marcel Petite became so important to us was, despite being a 5th generation family involved in cheese, Marcel Petite's family, they took over I think the true turn of Marcel Petite was when they took over an abandoned munitions fort, which Morgan has a lovely video of the beginning of that fort, which is right here. This is actually the entrance to the fort. And what is really incredible is they started to age their cheeses differently than any other.
Hold on. Morgan, can you hit play just so it sort of scans back and forth?
Yeah, sorry. I'm
Okay.
having
Go ahead, sorry.
No worries. Little technical difficulties. But what's really special about this fort is it provides the perfect environment of high humidity, but low temperature. So what's unique is the Marcel Petite Comtés in general are aged at a much higher humidity than other Comtés. But what is more important and more distinct is the lower temperature, because the aging process is actually slower, which is a more delicate way and lengthy way to develop flavors. Now Marcel Petite has 2 caves. They have this one, which is Fort Saint Antoine, which we are featuring. 3 of your cheeses are aged in that cave, and then 2 from Les Granges Narbeau, and 2 cheeses are aged at Les Granges Narbeau. And so we are going to dig into that very quickly, because I know we want to eat cheese. But what's also really special about the relationship that we've created is that David and I went last September, and this is a trip that we do every single year to actually hand select our wheels. In that case of September, it's particularly for the holidays, but it's not only that, it's to maintain the relationship. And also we have developed a profile that our customers have now know and love. In fact, David brought his notes of cheese tasting from 2010 at the Cave, which is incredible. And having that type of relationship with the chef de cave, which is the person who is in charge of aging and maturing all of the wheels and kind of dictating where they go and how long their lifespan should be. It's a really beautiful experience where you taste with the chef de cave, and we learn from him as much as he learns from us, because he learns from us, what flavors our customers are really enjoying and what wheels they're loving. And what we're finding is in that map that I showed you of the various fruitières, the cheese makers, those little co-ops, without even knowing it and realizing it, we were actually purchasing cheeses and selecting cheeses from a select few fruitières because their cheeses had the flavor profiles that we tended to gravitate towards. And so now he knows that, and he generally tends to take us to those cheeses first. So it's a really, really special relationship that we've developed over time. And it's always kind of ever evolving, which is a really, really nice way to make sure that we're constantly staying on top of what flavors you all love and the flavors that we all love. But without further ado, and this is actually before we will taste, I swear. But this is a video from that trip in September of our selection. And the selection process is very, very important, not only in tapping the wheel to hear for defects, but also.
So what we done is we close everything to avoid
quarantine. Cheese quarantine.
Yeah, but keeping a cheese 24 months and more.
Oh, it's gonna happen.
Will you be at the fancy food show? Yeah?
No. No. I will not be at the fancy food show, no. So just to quickly explain what he was doing there. So he's tapping for a couple reasons. Tapping, to make sure that there are no defects, and a defect means a fissure within the cheese. And if that's there, it means one of two things. The fissure means that wheel's ready, it's got to go now, or that it can't go further and it may not last quite as long as they thought. So because he can hear the difference. The other thing is he's listening to where he feels he should plug that wheel to taste, because different spots have different, it ages the same, but he feels, or they feel, that things have a different quality of texture a little bit, or it's going to be better representative in a different spot where it feels better. So that's why he's tapping. When he pulls it out, so what's interesting about this specific tasting was he tasted and then went straight to us. A lot of times, that's Jose de Almeida, who is the sort of second man in charge of the caves there under Claude. But Jose often tastes and then goes to whoever he's working with. So the person who asked me if I was going to fancy food was Benoit. So oftentimes Jose and Benoit will taste and they'll talk first. If Jose's not sure that we'll like it, he might talk first, or just he's not positive about the wheel. So he tastes to make sure that it's okay, or sometimes smells. And I don't know if you could see how small that taste was, but the top of your pinky is about the size. And so when we do that and you pull that little thing and you taste, first what you do is we feel the texture of it. You smell it quickly, and then based on that little taste is the judgment call that we make. So I'll sort of say this as half joking, but kind of half serious as well. When you guys are tasting these cheeses, remember, one, it's a luxury to be able to taste this amount of cheese at once and then describe the taste, because when we're doing it, it's a snap decision. Do we like it? Do we not? What do we taste? Julia mentioned, Isan sort of passing the test, as it were. The very first time that I tasted cheeses with Claude, who's Jose's boss, Claude and Philippe, we were tasting cheeses, the 12-month aged, or about the 12-month aged, and I was with someone else, and one of us we're tasting, they asked what we taste, and somebody said strawberry. I like to think it was my, coworker, but I don't know for sure. But, said, taste strawberry. And Claude looked at it and said no. And he plugged the wheel back up and we walked away from it. It didn't matter if we liked it, if he liked it. We didn't judge the wheel correctly. And so we had to move on from there. And it wasn't a, you guys don't know what you're talking about, is you don't understand this wheel. And so the flavor profiles, as Julia mentioned, that we've been working with have been based a lot on when I started doing it, they were on Isan, our former owner, and a couple other people. And then I started doing it, and it sort of melded into, in many ways, my flavor profile. We've added Mark, who's another one of our international buyers. And now we're sort of slowly adding Julia's flavor profile into the mix as well. And they make calls on what we're going to taste based on these notes. They have notes going back the whole time. They could tell you what I tasted in 2007, which is why I try to hold on to all the notes. His 2010 notes, when I look at them, are not different than notes I take now. The fruitier might be different, but essentially it's all the same. When we're about to start tasting, I do want to sort of get into the fruitier system a little bit at some point, but I think tasting is a little more fun. And so without further ado, we're going to taste, right? We're going to start with the Comté Elegance.
All right. Step one. So just so that you all have them in order, we're doing this by age. So we're starting with the Comté Elegance. Second is the Comté Gourmandise. Third will be Comté Fort Saint Antoine. Fourth will be Comté Le Fort. And then last will be the Comté Grand Cru. And so that's the order. We can revisit the order if anything gets out of hand. But we're going to start with the Comté Elegance. And again, as you can see from your cards, we're going up in age. So we're starting from the younger. And I think what's really special about Comté is it's so true to kind of the French style of aging cheeses, in that there is no best, so to speak. It is completely due to your preference. I know people who really love the, 24 to 30 month, and people whose favorite is 10 to 12. So it really depends on what you're using it for, how you're enjoying it, what you're enjoying with it. So the first two cheeses that we're going to be tasting are from the second newer cave of Marcel Petite at Lake Branche-Narbeau. So with the flavor wheel up, we're going to taste the Comté Elegance. So just like we do with all cheeses, definitely encourage you to tear a little piece off, smell it. Luckily, when you're in the cave, the cheese is quite cold, which is part of the reason why we kind of press it between our fingers to warm it up slightly. This is at room temperature, so you have a head start in that realm. And we don't want to influence you too much. And then, like I said, it's not necessarily right or wrong, but seeing that flavor wheel, are there any flavors, and you can type it in or you can unmute yourself, that you are picking up in this Comté Elegance, which is the youngest wheel that we carry, aged 6 to 10 months.
There is no wrong answer, I swear.
Lactic? It's in the lactic.
Yep, lactic is a great start.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within that lactic, because I think it's a great start. Within that lactic, what are the descriptors that you might see in there that might then further that a little bit along?
Maybe something along the lines of fresh cream.
Yep, I think that's good.
I do too.
Fresh cream and lactic, and then now we'll start adding. I don't mind. Just that way, because I don't want anybody to feel. You can always say anything in this. trust me, I've learned that even in the cave, I can say something that's not right, but it's my taste bud, and I go for it. If
But
they
you
don't
just
agree,
told us that we don't get cheese if we get it wrong.
no, we don't get the
Take
cheese.
away.
You
That's
get it.
what take away.
You got to send it back if you get it wrong. So you'll notice there's an envelope with that you can send it back
With a
if you don't get it
return
right to return.
Go ahead and try me. Come at me. Let's see how it goes. I'm trying to get the back.
That's it. So I think lactic and fresh cream are very good. There's also a really light element of fruit. Now it's interesting on their note, fruit, there's all those different nuts listed, right? Which in this, I get sort of a young almond. It's more specifically almond than any other nut. Fresh, uncooked, unpeeled almond, something you might bake with, and it's light, but it's there. And so when we start, so now we go lactic and fresh cream to a fresh almond, and not the green almond, but a fresh young almond, and you can sort of build from there. You know, there's a light herbal quality to it, very minimal, but it's there. Now, so sort of as we sort of taste this and go on with it, to give you a descriptor of what Lagrange Narbeau, these caves mean and why they're different, because it is important. Marcel Petite, which is officially called Formaggio Marcel Petite. And Marcel Petite, his grandson Lionel runs the company now. Marcel Petite has long passed away. So Lagrange Narbeau is two things. This is where they have their offices because it's still business, and this is where they do shipping. But they've built these caves. It's all above ground to mimic as much as they possibly could the fort. So, but it's not a fort, which means it's not underground, and they can get the temperatures low, but they can't get the natural humidity quite the same. And so wheels like Elegance, which are aged less, are aged at Lagrange Narbeau. Same with the next one, Gourmandise, that we're about to try, because they can't go that much further than they do. The cave's not, the aging facility is not quite the same, and you're not going to get the same results. You get vastly different flavor profiles based on the humidities, specifically the humidity that they do and the temperature. So that's why Elegance, which is called Elegance because to them, I think in terms of music, it's an elegant tune. It's easy, it's going, it flows, and that's what Elegance is all about. And that's exactly what we're tasting here. It's easy. Who could ever complain about this wheel unless you wanted something saltier? But it's an easy, delicious wheel.
So what did y'all think of that? It's definitely it's a more delicate cheese. It's exactly what you'd expect from such a young cheese. So it's such a fun opportunity. I'm so excited that you are able to try 5 cheeses, 5 Comtés tonight, because just as we move along, and I encourage you to save some of each so that you can do kind of a rapid tasting as well at one point, because then you can really see the progression and how much age and time, and it's not just age and time that influences these wheels. What you have to understand is it's not sort of a homogeneous selection where, you know, you make 100 wheels and they just close their eyes and blindly say, okay, these are going to be Elegance, these are going to be Gourmandise. They have to dictate what can handle that level of aging. And that's what really is special. And the most challenging part of their job is to say, okay, this cheese, after, 20 months, it's going to start to decline. So that's really the max. And so that is how you that's the true art form of this cheese.
So taste the Gourmandise. And while we're doing this, start thinking of flavors. But Morgan, can you pull up the video of the robot? So there's 2 reasons why I want this video being shown. So this is Philippe Gou, who was the president of Marcel Petite up until this last year. He retired. And Julia. And we are in sort of what is the area in the cave that we're in. This is at the fort. They dub it the nursery. So the wheels, when they first come from the fruitier, they go to this large cellar. And at this point, they're aged for a while, and they will determine where Marcel Petite, the chef de cave will determine where those wheels will end up going. If there's a defect, if they don't feel they're going to be developed enough, they go to Lagrange Narbeau. If they feel they can age them longer, or it meets a specific profile for 12-month age, it goes into the fort. What we're looking, if you can get it to play, Morgan, perfect.
Right.
This is Philippe talking. We'll talk in a second. Watch the robot turning the wheels of cheese.
And in the first beginning, it is with a dry salt. And
So that robot is basically going in. It is pulling the wheel out. It is brushing it with water and or brine, brushing it, and then putting it back onto, flipping it, putting it back into the boards.
And then it's with brine.
And so Marcel Petite has, I think, maybe 8 robots that go to the caves. They're programmed so they can do this exact. It's a really crazy thing to watch. But these wheels that we're looking at are no more than 2 months. We do not taste these. The only people who taste these wheels of cheese are the chef de cave, the people who work there. And that is simply to determine where they're going to end up. So the gourmandise that you're tasting, if I remember right, the fruitier number was 450, which is Valerie, I think, although I'm going to have to double check. It's not Valerie. I'm blanking, and it doesn't matter. It's 450 right here. So this is a fruitier that we work with often. So that wheel first went to the fort, was determined at some point that it wasn't going to meet the profile they wanted for what referred to as FSA or Fort Saint Antoine that we'll taste next, but it can age to maybe 12 months. At that point, they move it to Lagrange Narbeau and age it to there. So it can still fully develop to the age it needs to get to without becoming something that it's not. It will be aged appropriately and sold at the right time. And they literally they put these batches into micro batches. So batch, quote unquote, used to be a month. And now they take batches and they say, all right, well, 2 weeks here, these wheels can go to one place, these wheels can go to another, or these wheels can age to 24 months, these can age to 16. And they determine within all of this how that works. So what we're tasting here in gourmandise, again, we'll call it 10 to 12 months, but the months are irrelevant as it is the flavor profile. So you'll notice that this is more savory in comparison to the elegance. I need to taste it again here, but it's more savory, a little bit. I don't know that less. It's not that it's less delicate, but it's a little more forward in comparison. And that is, but this is the flavor profile that they are looking for gourmandise. This couldn't be a different wheel for them. It has to be gourmandise.
Any other flavors that you all are picking up on this one, especially in comparison to the first one?
A little smokier, a little almond,
Mm-hmm.
Is that a cooked almond?
or one with skin or no skin.
Exactly. Yeah.
Roasted.
Got it. They're different flavors.
Oh, yeah, roasted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely get more of the roasted flavor profile.
Mhm.
Or the lactic tones are there, but they're more undertones, I think,
Mhm.
versus the first cheese where that was kind of the star of the show, was that sort of parade of lactic flavors. And this is it's there, but it's more subdued and you get more of those roasted flavors on top.
Yeah, they're more up front than the lactic flavors.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the flavor's a little bit more long lasting as well. It coats the palate a little bit more.
Almost a little bready.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really great point.
Yeah.
And texture is something to not be ignored, I think, with hard. Sometimes we think like, oh, it's a hard cheese. But I think that texture is something that we should think about as well, because as you get to the older cheeses, you do lose some of that creamy mouthfeel, and you do get sort of a dryness, and you have to determine, at what point is too far, and where do you want to keep that sort of luscious mouthfeel, but still get those more intense savory. So it's really fun, I think, to taste through and I don't have a favorite Comté. It changes from wheel to wheel, batch to batch, always, and it's always ebbing and flowing. And it also changes depending on the season and what I'm interested in at the moment. But I think it's really fun to kind of find, for me, there's that perfect harmony of what I'm looking for at that moment. And that's what I look for in the Comté.
Just a quick, to take on her comment on texture. I think everybody has a big enough piece. Really take note and make sure you have a piece of this next to the next cheese we taste, because I want to talk about the texture after we do that. The texture of this is, you'll notice, not quite as smooth as the Elegant, right? Brittle, for lack of a better word. And that's because this wheel is maxed out in terms of age. They know, Marcel Petite knows it. That's why it's not going to be aged longer. And this cheese, the texture of it is exactly what it's supposed to be. But if they were to age this longer, the texture would change and become unpleasant and unfavorable for what they're looking for.
Like a more like sandy type texture,
So-
which is a defect.
Right, a defect. But as a rule, when we get gourmandise, it's always a little bit more. It's almost always this texture. And it's different, even though it's a little bit younger than the next one. It's still, it almost feels like it's older for that reason, even though it's not.
Okay. So we're moving on now. We're going to Fort Saint Antoine. And so the Comté Fort Saint Antoine is the first cheese of your flight that's aged in the fort. And that's why it is Fort Saint Antoine is the name of the cave, but we always just refer to it as the fort.
So we have the flavor wheel. Morgan, can you show the photo of Jose walking, not with Benoit, but with the cavernous one, that one. So you'll notice, all right, so a little bit about the fort. So the fort these are part of a series of forts that were built in the 1880s during the Prussian invasions, all along the border, stretching down into the Alps, through what this area is called the Doubs and the Haute Doubs, and up into Alsace. And these were munitions forts. They were built as warnings, but after World War II, they were all essentially abandoned by the French military. So this fort, which is the official name of this fort, is called Fort Leucotte, and it's in the village, which sits right above the village of Saint Antoine, which is tiny. It's you blink and you go through it. Marcel Petite refers to it as Fort Saint Antoine, which is what we do as well. But this was again abandoned after World War II. Was introduced to Marcel Petite in the 1960s from somebody, a friend of his, because Marcel Petite, whose father and grandfather were cheesemakers, Marcel Petite didn't want to be a cheesemaker. He wanted to age cheese, and his friend said, "Well, there's this fort. It's different." And Marcel Petite wanted to change the way Comté was aged and eaten, essentially. So going in there, found that it was a consistent degree, because at any point, so you saw what it looked like to the entrance of this fort, and there's all the earth around it. At any point in this fort, with the exception of the very top, like behind that hill where they have sort of a little deck to look out, there's no less than 5 meters of earth between the ceiling or the roof inside and outside. So it is so perfectly well consistently, or so consistent. There was also a high humidity level. So he automatically knew that he could change the way Comté was aged and eaten from then on. Comté used to look like Emmental, which was a fat wheel with big eyes in it. It was consumed between 3 to 8 months tops. and wasn't developed. When he started doing this, because of the temperature being lower and the high humidity, he was able, the wheels started to, they'd always been pressed, but the gas that makes those eyes was essentially sort of stunted. It didn't have a chance to expand and push the wheels out. So the wheels became a more consistent texture and size. So they sort of flattened out. And he started, his first sort of experiment was aging a wheel to about a year, which when he did this in the 60s was unheard of. Eventually it caught on, you know, and then the year and a half and 2 years. There are people, not Marcel Petite, who are aging past 3 years. And I'll be honest, I don't like the wheels. They're weird. They don't taste right. But Marcel Petite tends to agree that as well. They did try it, but it didn't work. But because of what Marcel Petite did, other people had to follow suit. Otherwise, they would get sort of lost in this. And they're still the coldest temperature of any cave. They're at about 11 degrees Celsius compared to the old school was 16 to 18 degrees Celsius. Now the other coldest cave, which is another abandoned fort, one of the only other abandoned forts for cave, called Fort Rouge, they do it at about 13 degrees. And that's a pretty big difference in Celsius. And so it's that much colder and it gives them that much more room for leeway. So, sorry, back to the Fort Saint Antoine cheese we're tasting. What are our thoughts and what are we tasting?
And this is the most popular cheese sold at Formaggio Kitchen, as an aside.
I love it. It's a little spicy and it's a little vegetal. It's really and really nice balance.
I'm sorry, what was the second descriptor you said? My apologies.
Vegetal.
Vegetal, yes.
I'm not sure what the difference is between hay and straw, so something like that.
Well, you know, if you don't know, again, you got to send the cheese back. So
It's not going back.
It has much more of a bite to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that fits into the descriptors.
No,
I felt the same. It's spicy, but maybe none of the spices that are under spicy. Spices under spicy.
Well, okay, so when you guys are saying spicy, this is always a curious question because it means different things. Are you talking spices as in like spiced, as in this description it says nutmeg, whatever, or are you saying spicy as in like black pepper or chili flake,
like a pecan?
Yeah, like I'm curious because it's such a different flavor profile and descriptor as well.
Yeah, I think more towards the peppery side than
I agree.
than the nutmeg or vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
What I get out of this cheese too, is, you know, when you roast a vegetable that it becomes sweet and caramelized.
Mm-hmm.
Add those roasted flavors, but it has such an undertone of sweetness because you're drawing the sugars out. It's still so savory, but that's one thing that I love about the Fort Saint Antoine is that sort of undertone of sweetness that is so pronounced in this cheese.
I'm almost getting a little mushroom in there.
A little bit. So it's funny. I get green peppercorn, and like if you get hard green peppercorn, not the jarred stuff. I don't know that it's a roasted vegetable, but it's more specifically like a roasted carrot because it's a sweetness to it. It's not vegetable to me is such a vegetable with broad term. To narrow it, I get carrot, and in a way, it's more spring carrot than it is winter carrot. So the sugars are slightly higher, and those flavors, but the sugars are higher, but the flavor is more concentrated.
Do they have more of a crystalline structure then too as they age more?
Absolutely. Yeah, you'll start to see that. And that's actually the lactose turning into protein crystals over time. And so when you get that texture, a lot of people mistake it as salt. And it's not that sort of crunchiness and crunchy bits that you get over time is actually little protein crystals. And so that leads us really perfectly into the next one, which is the Comté Lafort, which now we're getting up in age. And we're talking about 16 to 20 months. But again, you know, we bring these cheeses in and they continue aging in our own cave as well. And so we do not hold them in our cave for any particular amount of time, but it's the best place to keep them so that they are happy and at a high humidity and continuing to age properly. And so this one I find can be a very, very variable cheese. So I'm very curious to see, in a good way, like sometimes we get it in on the younger side and it has almost no crystalline structure to it. Obviously, this one has quite a lot. So it does tend to change quite a lot from wheel to wheel, depending on how old it is.
So Marcel Petite refers to this cheese as symphony, right? Symphony, the reason they call it symphony is that there's so many flavors working together to get this, everything together. There's so many notes, flavor notes, for lack of a better way to describe that, to come together to create this one thing. So whereas I don't feel that this is quite as subtle as the Fort Saint Antoine. Fort Saint Antoine, to me, it's all the subtlety in the world, because part of it, it's aged less. This one, it may be less subtle, but there's more going on with it. But they've come together in a way that just sort of works together. It's way more complex than what we've tried, but deeper and darker as well. For darker meaning the flavors are intensifying just a little bit.
So if you look and think about this, the second cheese that you try, this cheese is about twice as old as it. And, you know, imagine that you are the chef de cave. What would you taste for, you know, thinking about how well will this cheese age? You know, how can it handle? And you notice that sweetness, the undertone of sweetness in the Fort Saint Antoine. That's something that we find in a lot of the cheeses at the fort, is that undertone of sweetness, because it seems that those cheeses tend to carry age a lot nicer. Because what you don't want to have happen is when you age a cheese for, you know, 20 months, 24 months, 30 months, it can, if it's all savory, it can get to be quite bitter and quite intense and very one note and very heavy. So there's still, you know, the symphony, I think, is a perfect way of describing it, because there is still so much going on and so much flavor. And despite being a bolder, you know, it is, I think, equally as complex as the Fort Saint Antoine, but just at a different octave. You know, it's a little bit more intense and, you know, it's hitting those notes a little bit louder, but it still has a lot of nuance and ebbs and flows. But what are folks tasting in this Comté Lafort?
I think animal. It's I really like the way it comes into my sinuses as it sits in my mouth, you know.
Absolutely. I think animal is a really great descriptor when you get to kind of this age. The meat broth is kind of what I get out of that sort of that slice of the pie of the flavor chart.
Yeah.
Any other flavors people are picking up on?
Some kind of nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very roasted nuts.
Absolutely. I still get so much buttery notes from it. I almost get like a cashew quality where like the nut is not too aggressive, but it's like that buttery nut.
Yeah.
But a little toasted, not raw.
Right.
So you get that deeper flavor profile, but it is like a very buttery, rich roasted flavor.
That is really
And
nice.
peppery.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cheese. I mean, all of these cheeses have, that's why it's so taste. So as far as I know, according to Marcel Petite, we have the largest Comté selection in the country. Which but for us it matters because when you taste them side by side, there's such distinct differences, and this is not even all of them. We still have, we picked what we thought were kind of would be the best to highlight the different ages and really give you a really wide variety. But we're going to finish off with, since we're getting towards the end of the evening, we're going to finish off with the Grand Cru, which is a super special one. We're talking 24 to 30 months old, one of the oldest wheels in the store, let alone one of the oldest wheels of Comté that we have. So you'll see, to break it apart is much less bendy. It's definitely breaks apart a little bit easier. It's got, because of the age.
As you're tasting this, to explain, when you talk about it being rare, so at the fort, Marcel Petite has about 125 to 135,000 wheels of cheese. And there's a long story why it's so much, but it's made every day, 365 days a year, minimum of 6 wheels a day at each fruitier. Most of them are 10 to 15. But in any case, there's all these wheels. Out of those 125,000 wheels, about 2%, I think it's maybe up to 3 to 3.5% at this point, get aged to more than 20 months. So what we're tasting, so we are allotted at this point 25 wheels a year of this specific cheese, of this age profile, sorry. When we go to the fort, we can taste, but we're not guaranteed to get those wheels that we taste, because when we ship, if they ship that week, cool. But if they ship in 2 months, they have to give us something that they feel is right on. So if there's, out of 125,000 wheels, if there's only 2.5 to 3% of those wheels aging here, that's a really small number. During the holidays, we get one age that's older, and it's about 10% of those, of that 2% that get aged to 3 years. So what you're tasting is something that's not common with Marcel Petite. And while they were the first to do it, other people have taken suit or taken liberties to do it themselves. And I'll be honest with you, nobody does it quite like they do, because they don't have the right facilities to do it. It's too warm. And a 2-year age Comté is only good when it's done right. And this is how it's done right by Marcel Petite. And this is a wonderful profile. We have 2 more wheels of Grand Cru coming in our next shipment, and that's it until the holiday season. So enjoy this while you can.
And they are very confident in this cheese. When we go to select the younger wheels, like the 12 months, 16 months, we can bounce around from batch to batch and say, well, can we try something else that's a little bit more vegetal, or can we try something that's a little bit more brothy? When you get to the Grand Cru level, you get one taste, and that's more of a courtesy than anything. Yeah. You don't get more than that. And if you ask, they say no. That's it. You get to enjoy it and see what you can look forward to, but really they're so careful about what's allocated to be Grand Cru or higher. And to me, this is just such an exceptional cheese to have such concentration of flavors that explode, but with balance. That's the hard thing. When you get a cheese that's really old, it is so challenging to keep that balance so that you do not have any flavor profiles overwhelming one another. And I think that's what they do so well is, basically it takes a cheese like Comté Lefort that we just tried. And if you taste those 3 last ones, the Fort Saint-Antoine, Lefort, and the Grand Cru in rapid succession, the last one is really, you've got like a sparkler with the Fort Saint-Antoine. It's a little bit more delicate, smooth. Comté Lefort is, a little bit, a bigger, sort of like an at-home firecracker. But that Comté Grand Cru is a complete firework. you know, and they all have that balance of flavors, but this one is just, you know, it's also a particularly good wheel of
It is. I know we're getting towards the end, but what do people taste in this? Because it's very, very different to me than anything else we've tasted.
Well, I'm glad you explained that, Julia, because I love the texture and the way it feels in my mouth, but I couldn't identify any particular flavor that stood out. So I'm glad you explained that it's because it's perfect. It is in perfect balance, and that I love the texture of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no category for perfect flavor on the wheel. So yeah, I'm gonna agree with Kathy.
Awesome. And Vicky was saying this one has a little bit more of a caramelized. Let me pull this up. So I was really not expecting all these cheeses to be quite so different. This one is a bit caramelly for me, which is totally true. You get that sort of almost, you know, like when you get a really nice burnt sugar ice cream, like a burnt caramel ice cream. I love those sort of deeper, darker flavor notes.
So this has hints of some of the profile that starts to happen, but it's not as pronounced. This sort of has a milk chocolatey with the caramelized flavor you're talking about. I would call it milk chocolate. But that's just my terminology. It's like drinking a really light coffee in a way. Yeah. Although this, oddly enough, it's funny, I tasted this a couple weeks ago, but tasting it again and having wine, it does change the way everything tastes. Or I ate it a couple weeks ago, this time having wine. There's actually a freshness to this cheese that I was not expecting at this point. And when I say fresh, like it is, I'm going to use the word camphor. Camphor is present in herbs like basil and mint. That sort of that freshness, that's what that is. And there's a lot of that in this. So to me, it's a balance of a lot of darker notes like the coffee and the chocolate, balanced with this sort of fresh herbal note that balances out very, very well. It's a really interesting wheel of cheese because typically when we talk, you know, when Julia says she doesn't have a favorite, I have a favorite. I do not have a problem saying that. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's usually not the older. It's usually not this one. It's just because the flavors change so much and it becomes less delicate. And this has maintained a lot of delicate flavors.
Yeah, this is, I think, a really, really nice example of what a Grand Cru can taste like. So now you can do a show of hands on the screen or in the using the icons, but I'd love to go through and see if anybody has a favorite amongst this particular batch. Are we ready? Okay, so who liked the first one, the Comté Elegance, the best in this round? All right, the Comté Gourmandise. All right, we've got to vote for the Gourmandise. Oh, what about the, okay, we got a couple. The Fort Saint Antoine. The first cheese of the Fort. And the Lefort, the Comté Lefort. All right, double vote for Ellen and Michael. I gotcha. And what about the Grand Cru? All right, Kathy and Rich, and yeah, Vicky, and I have to give this one a big vote just because of how nuanced it is. I do love them all though. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody is enjoying your little cards.
Yes.
Okay, good.
If
the cards are wonderful.
We love them. Can we collect them all? That's our goal. We want to collect all the cards and then we will try to all the cheeses.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We can thank Morgan, who's been our wonderful moderator tonight, and she helps to keep these programs running really smoothly. She has developed these cards, and I absolutely love them because people always say, how do I remember the cheeses that I
Right.
love? And so just keep the cards of the ones that you love. And then
We
you always,
put them up with magnets.
oh, I love
What a
that.
great
So when we
idea.
want to
Magnets,
order, we
right.
just open it and it's
Um,
there they all are. And then the ones that we like less, we put notes on in a little envelope so that we can regroup later.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
One thing I wanted to say is, to me, when you do a class of Comté, an hour or teach anything like this, an hour barely breaks the surface, and that's true of a lot of things. But Comté, there's so much going on. If you guys have any questions and you want answered, reach out to us. They'll forward the emails to me, and I'll respond to you. I can give you so much information that'll kind of blow your mind. Way more than we could have done right now. So if you have more questions, feel free to email us, and I will get all the answers to you, because there's a lot.
There really is.
Yeah.
And awesome. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And hopefully we see you all next month.